Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. Roll call, please.
Chair Latham.
Here.
Vice Chair Biasotti.
Here.
Chair Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Also here.
Commissioner Harmon.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Looks like we have a full commission today.
Thank you.
First time since I've joined.
Commissioner Biasotti,
Yes.
will you please lead us in the pledge?
Thank you. No, we are still down one. Right.
They're next to you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag.
United States of America.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will start with our business items. Number one is the approval of the minutes from January 21st, 2019. Do I have, does anybody have anything they'd like to add to them? Or anything? I did find one, I think it was a typo rather than a misrepresentation, but in the public comments from the minutes, public comments not on the agenda, number 5 of Mr. Lipinski's comments, I understood him to mean that he believes that adding housing units will not cause housing prices to go down, and we would want to replace do in his statement with not.
Number 5. Jerry, did you get that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I'd have to review the video to remember what the...
I remember the spirit of his comment was that he did not believe that adding housing units would bring housing costs down.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Can't quite remember. We'll go back and revisit again.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. So, any motions for the minutes?
Through the chair,
Yes.
I move that we approve the minutes of January 21st, 2020.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Me.
Okay. Any opposed?
Because I forgot to come.
Okay. One abstention and the rest are ayes. Thank you. So we will open to public comment. Seeing as there is nobody in our audience to comment on anything not on the agenda, we will close that, and we would normally move to the announcements of conflict of interest, but as we do not have any public items, I think that we can fast forward through that. Okay, very good. And then we'll move on to item number 4, which will be items from staff.
Yes.
Good evening, Planning Commission Chair and members of the Commission. I have the pleasure of being the Chief Building Official for tonight. With the competing deadlines and whatnot, we thought the best way to serve you better with the code enforcement presentation is to actually ask you for ideas pertaining to code enforcement, and staff will come back with a more tailored presentation. So what we had in mind is to have you talk amongst yourself to see how code enforcement can relate to what you do in terms of how Planning Commission can review a project that comes before you. For instance, dispute between neighbors on a fence height, illegal conversion that requires a conditional use permit, or maybe more broadly on how code enforcement program works, how many staff there are, how many cases that they look at, what is the current procedure. So we want to kind of open the forum to you and see if there's any particular interest, and we're looking probably for about just a few, 2 to 3 topics amongst yourself, and then I'll deliver that message back to building official so we can come back with a more tailored presentation. As we're getting together for this presentation, we realize that the code enforcement world really involves a lot. We're not sure what you had in mind would be something that what we want to prepare, so we want to kind of put that back to see if you have any particular interest in an area in code enforcement that we can do a presentation to follow up on. So I'll let you open the floor.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have any questions, specific questions or topics they'd like.
Through the chair, I have
Yes.
just a couple of quick ones come to mind. How many enforcement officers are there?
There are currently 2 senior code enforcement staff with 1 more code enforcement staff, so a total of 3.
And do they investigate code violation following a complaint, or how did the investigations start?
So that could definitely be a topic, but generically speaking, yes, they respond to complaints that has been filed either through San Bruno response or a paper complaint form.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes.
So I think the whole idea of having a code enforcement presentation started from a request from me, and you hit a little bit on in one of your suggested topics on what I had asked for, which was an overview of the program and what is it about, what is the process, you just answered how many staff there are, what is the general process for how things work. What prompted my request is that in talking with staff and about various topics, often we'll find that the answer is, well, it doesn't work that way, and just wanting to understand how things actually do work would make us be able to ask better questions.
Understood.
So-
If I can follow up with the question,
course.
are you particularly asking just how generally the program works,
Yeah.
or how it?
Like a typical request? What would happen with a typical request if there was a report coming in through San Bruno Responds about a derelict property or something?
Understood.
How would that go through the entire process? What would happen if the person didn't respond, or didn't, if there was a citation and that wasn't followed up on, the whole process all the way through?
Understood. Thank you.
That's what I was kind of looking for.
And adding on to what you were saying, I think specifically I'd also be interested in knowing how the code enforcement would relate to the types of items that we see come before us. So that when we consider things, like for example, we had a property recently where the applicant had said that they planned to use their property as a boarding house, which was outside of their conditional use permit requirements. And I think that made us kind of wonder, if we do approve this project, how would we be certain that it was not going to be used as they had agreed to?
That was in fact the exact question I asked at our session, was like, okay, like, is anybody going to check up on this if no neighbor complains? Which
Right.
I honestly don't have particularly strong feelings that we should, as long as it doesn't disturb the neighbors. But it is like, it is a little weird to be saying, really, we're not permitting you to use it as a boarding house, but we're not really going to check. That seems odd.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm hearing a couple ideas. One is the overall program. How does it work? The procedure when a complaint is filed, what steps have been or will be taken, and also possibly how code enforcement program relates to planning commission and what you can do in terms of the project that you see.
I have one other remark, which I don't know if others can help me refine this. I have heard from a couple of other San Bruno citizens, who I will not name in order to not, I don't want them to be sort of on the spot with code enforcement, but that they've had some issues with getting clarity on sort of like what exact steps they need to take in order to remediate issues, and getting things in writing that they can rely on. And so I think, what can we do as a city to help give homeowners and their contractors sort of certainty that they know what actions they need to take in a timely manner? And that's like a concern for me.
So if I can understand a little clearer, so you want to know the current procedure protocols in place?
Yeah.
Not necessarily asking for any improvement just yet?
Yeah, like how, if we are issuing somebody a violation, saying like, oh, you have this problem, are we additionally providing like clarity about here are the actions you need to take, rather than going back and forth with them for weeks over like, oh, if I did this, does that solve the problem, you know?
Okay. So I will definitely relay those information back to our chief building official.
I had one more.
Oh, sure.
How do we measure success of the program, and how do we, like, are there metrics, you know, how many new tickets are open per week or per month or whatever, and how many are resolved? You know, so I would imagine that would be important information for the team to have, you know, like when they went from two code enforcement people to 3, I'm sure they had to justify that, you know, we have all this extra work. How does that, you know, how does that get measured, and does that get reported out?
Through the chair, Commissioner Hamilton, are you referring to in general, or how it relates to the Planning Commission?
I would think more in general.
Okay.
Through the chair, a question. If an investigation into a reported code violation requires an inside examination of a property, and the code enforcement officers are refused entry, what's the procedure in that case?
Through the chair?
Yes.
So it appears to me, just from the questions being asked, that if we had an overview of just the process, protocols, policies, a lot of the questions probably will be answered.
Yeah.
And it'll probably prompt some other types of questions as well.
Yeah.
But I'm pulling things out of my mind as you ask the question. But I think the presentation and how the procedure is in place will probably really allow me to look at it from a different perspective.
Okay. Thank you. Got it.
Through the chair?
Yes.
Do we have listed anywhere a website or where people can look and see what active permits there are? For example, when you drive around the neighborhood and you see work going on in a house, in San Francisco, they put the permit like on the front window.
Right.
We talked about doing that here a long, long time ago, and it kind of fell to the wayside. Is the list of active permits available to the public anywhere?
I
Or
don't know the
could
answer
it be?
to that. Could it be?
I
So
actually
could-
do know the answer to that because
Oh,
I've looked
please.
it up recently. That if you visit the city website from the building department, there is a link to a system called eTrackIt, and you can look up any property in the city. And
Yeah,
look
for
at look
active
at
permits?
the
Current active
you can
permits.
find the permits. I don't know how rapidly they update it, but I've been able to see the permits on my own property. It takes maybe a month or so before they pop up, though.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and it has the records back to like at least 2000, I want to say, maybe further.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's the case. I'm getting a head nodding from Jerry, so.
Yes, eTrackIt. There's OnBase, which has older permits if you want to go ahead and search for anything that's older than maybe 8 years.
No, that's fine. But I was thinking more in terms of
Existing.
existing stuff that's going on today, that you see something strange going on. It's like, we didn't vote on that, and they're building what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we can see what the permits are.
I believe that eTrackIt has all the building permits.
Okay.
So most of the building permits may not necessarily have gone before you for approval.
Right, some of
Yeah.
the staff level stuff, yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay,
are
cool,
you
perfect.
asking for like a current list of active permits
Yeah.
that you can have readily available?
Yeah, is that possible?
I'm not sure if we can probably get that from eTrackIt, because there's like dates that we can capture and see what are existing or in progress.
Okay.
Do you know, Jerry, how rapidly, like my sense from seeing my own permits is that there is at least like a week or 2 or 3 of lag before permits pop up there. Because like I know I went looking for a permit that I thought was approved, didn't find it, and came back like a month later, and then it was there.
Yes, it does have a lag, and Yeah, and it's something that somebody inputs, its staff, and, yeah. But generally, if there's a permit that is created within eTracket, it should automatically come up automatically into the website, but again, there's a little transition period.
Thank you.
Through the chair, but Vice Chair Biassotti's comment made me think of something else. It would fall under the same general overview of how everything works. And the question would be, are code enforcement officers only allowed to respond to specific complaints, or if they're out and about in the course of their job and they see something that's not, you know, that is not on the list, but something that they in their professional opinion feels should be on the list, can they put that on the list?
You're saying that if they happen to be doing a drive-by inspection and see something, whether or not they can respond to that?
Exactly.
Got it.
Thank you.
Through the chair. This is not quite related to code enforcement, but my experience in the field of early childhood for 45 years, and I've done some, through my professional world, have been part of licensing, helping people accomplish licensing. So when I go into an early childhood program, a licensed family daycare, I find it really difficult to shift my planning commission from my professional. And I don't know about any of you that have experience in your own profession, but I find that to have been one of the hardest things the first few years as a commissioner, because I would see things that actually were not in compliance, but really was not my role. And what I did do with the information is I just took it back to staff and let it handle from that point, because I'm not there with the licensing hat on.
Sure.
But it's one of the hardest things when, I don't know about code enforcement when they're out doing their job. I would think, though, they're within their job if they're observing those types of things. But anyway, I just thought I would mention the challenges that I've had.
Thank you.
Any other questions or topics? Okay.
I think I got a lot of good information, so I'll definitely come back with a more fruitful presentation by Roy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now I have a real presentation for you. So I'll be talking about a summary of the state housing law update that was signed into effect in 2019. Tonight's agenda will begin with the background, followed by an overview of the significant housing law that was signed into effect in 2019, and then I'll conclude my presentation with the major steps and the tasks that have been identified for these implementation. First off, there were more than 200 plus state bills that were introduced in 2019. Of the 200 plus, about 20 of them were signed into related to housing. Governor Gavin Newsom signed them on October 9, 2019, and then most of them have become effective as of January 1st, 2020. This is an image of the handout that's included in your packet. It's prepared by California Housing Legislation, HCD, Housing and Community Department, to kind of outline and give you a sense of what sort of topic and what sort of area these new housing laws have provided for the days to come. So if we were to start with the top left corner, AB 1485 provided a faster approval for moderate income housing in the Bay Area. I'll go into the later part of my presentation to talk about what that really is. It really is a modification of the SB 35 that was approved by the state early on. If you look at kind of down below, up zoning, AB 1763, that's also a modification of the current density bonus of the state provision. If you continue to look down, there's the shelter, and that actually AB 101 provides some of the emergency shelter and homeless shelter as by right for local zoning. If you start looking to your right top, SB 5 creates a new local funding agency for infrastructure and whatnot. I'll go into that in detail as well. Under AB 1483, it talks about having information, the surplus land available on our city's website. And also, if you're look to go to the bottom of the center of the page, talks about tenant protection. If you may remember, City Council considered a emergency ordinance last November pertaining to this area. One of the many changes has to do with ADU. Some of you have an ADU in your backyard, some of you have seen them. So there were 6 laws that were signed into the effect. That includes SB 13, AB 68, AB 881, AB 587, AB 671, and AB 670 that changed how regulations pertaining to ADUs. In 2017, this is the first time the state has provided flexibility for the regulations pertaining to ADU. There was another modification by the state in 2018. Last year, which became effective this January, really opened up the flexibility for city to provide additional regulation on ADUs. The first major change included allowing both ADU and what we call the junior ADU, JADUs, both on a single-family residence. ADUs could be perceived as a garage conversion, a brand new granny's unit in the back. And junior ADUs could be perceived as a bedroom that share a common kitchen or share a common sanitary facility, i.e. a bathroom with your main house. Both ADUs and junior ADU, JADUs, can be allowed at the same time. State has also provided flexibility for ADUs to be allowed in both residential and also mixed-use zones. There are certain criteria that the city can't limit the location of ADU, and that includes, let me see. The location limitation is on water, sewer, safety, or traffic. For instance, if there's a water capacity issue, there's a sewer capacity issue, or there's a traffic congestion or a safety concern, the city can definitely impose limitation on the creation of ADUs. State has now allowed all ADUs to be at least 800 square feet or up to 1,000 square feet for any 1+ bedrooms. The state has also relaxed the side setback and also the rear setback to be as little as 4 feet. Yes.
To clarify that, so basically it's 800 square foot if it's a studio, it's 1,000 square foot if it is one or more standalone bedrooms.
Right, so the 800 square feet is for any ADUs. So if you have 1+ bedroom, you could potentially go up to 1,000. That's how the state law is crafted right now. And the state has also provided flexibility on development impact fee. For any unit less than 750 square feet, there will be no impact fee imposed. For any units greater than 750 square feet, the impact fee will be charged proportionally to the size, incremental above 750 square feet. There's no replacement parking for any garage conversion. So if you were to convert your detached or attached garage into an ADU, there's no replacement parking required. Lastly, state has released the owner occupancy restriction for until at least 2025. For most of the ADUs that were created before January 1st, 2020, the owner would have to declare owner occupancy, meaning that owners occupying one of the 2 units, so that they can only rent out one for the time being. The state now has provided that relaxation to say you can rent both of the units out.
And that comes into effect when? Excuse me.
It's already in effect.
It's in effect.
Yeah.
January 1st, wasn't it?
January 1st. But it will sunset, this clause will sunset in 2025.
Through the chair, regarding the junior ADU, I'm just learning about this. So I'm trying to understand the difference between renting a room in my house out to somebody and a JADU, because they seem pretty similar. Would this come into effect like if I was adding on a room to my house and declare it before I add it on as being a JADU, that the requirements might be different in building it, or?
I can't answer that question just yet, but I do understand that if one was to create a junior ADU, the de-restriction requirement would apply on the junior ADU. So you would have to declare that you're occupying, the owner occupancy, you, as an owner, you would have to occupy either in the junior ADU or the main house.
Right.
So essentially, you cannot be renting your house, your junior ADU, and also your ADU all at the same time.
Okay.
So in terms of construction, I'm not sure if there's a difference between just renting a bedroom out.
Right.
And kind of in that vein, if one were to, let's say, convert their garage to be a junior ADU, does
It's-
that work? Like, for example, you had mentioned that parking replacement would not be required?
Right. So you could potentially convert your garage so long that this garage has access to your common shared kitchen or
Right.
common shared bathroom. So there has to be some sort of internal access.
Okay, what would prevent one from just turning their garage into a bedroom, calling it an ADU and occupying it as an extra bedroom on their
If
home?
you have a detached garage and you have no connection to the main house.
So it has to be detached, that's the,
For a junior ADU, I think it has to be attached garage with internal connection, because you're not providing that separate cooking and separate sanitary bathroom within that ADU. So you're sharing it with the main house. Essentially, it's kind of like Commissioner Hamilton said, it's kind of like renting out a separate bedroom. So you need to provide cooking and sanitation facility for junior ADU if it's not provided within that unit.
Okay, so most homes in San Bruno, not all, but many of them have attached garages.
Correct.
I'm just wondering what would stop all of San Bruno from just turning their garages into, which I know, we talk a lot about parking requirements in the
Yeah.
projects that come before us, but what would stop everybody from San Bruno from making their two-bedroom, one-bath home into a
Eight.
three-bedroom, one-bath home and not replacing parking?
So from just reading the law, from reading the state law, not much. It does look like, so the reason the state is doing that is to solve the dire housing crisis, is to provide additional housing units on a very fast and easy round. So based on reading the laws, there's not much that it will prevent people from doing it. But we've been told by contractors and other insurance agents that the cost, the actual cost, construction costs associated with creating these ADUs could be a lot higher than the owners anticipate. So that could be a turnoff reason for owners to want to get started and then only to find out later that it does cost a lot more. So the cost might be an issue, but it's not something that the code can regulate.
Yeah, through the,
You started first.
okay, through the chair. I mean, my understanding is that this does not make any modification to the requirements. I mean, when you do a garage conversion, the building code, in order to make it habitable space, is a fairly significant barrier. I mean, you can't just, throw down a
Yeah.
thin carpet and call it a. But yeah, I believe the JADU portion, my understanding is that it's minimally new construction, that it has to be within the existing building envelope with the addition of no more than 150 square feet, unless the law changed since the last time I read about this. But the ADU is a fairly significant new construction, but the JADU is minimal new construction and primarily within the existing. Yeah, but I think the other reason that people wouldn't do it is just because they need places to put their own cars.
or junk.
I don't know how many people put their cars in their garages in the city.
Through the chair, one thing I learned about when the first round of ADU laws went into effect a couple of years ago, I was on the TSBC, so we were paying attention to those as they related to parking. And the justification for not requiring replacement of parking if you convert your garage or whatever was that if the home was within 1 mile of a transit stop, 1 mile as the crow flies. And then they presented a map of San Bruno with all of the transit stops with 1 mile circles around them, and lo and behold, the whole city is covered. Unfortunately, in practice, that doesn't really work. Where I live, I haven't seen a bus go by in decades. And the transit stop that they drew the 1 mile circle around is in front of the old Peninsula High School that has a Samtrans bus twice a day, 9 months out of the year. and apparently that's my option for using public transit. So it was a little iffy.
So the state law has changed slightly in that regard.
Good.
The 1 mile is now down to half a mile. However, it's not how crow flies. It's basically within a street.
Oh, that's
so
good.
within, but it's also allowing half a mile from any public transit. That could be Sam Transit or any Google Bus or anything like that, or any Ziploc car, like a Ziploc parking lot area.
Google Bus would count? I mean,
I think
Google,
so. It
I
has,
can't ride a Google Bus.
It has 5 categories for parking, and so we did a preliminary map of San Bruno, and basically most of the cities is covered within a half a mile of these categories. So the state has provided some modification to the original 2017 regulation, but essentially it's encouraging people to use transit, it's encouraging people to use other modes of transportation other than driving on their own.
I mean, everybody can get behind that. Everybody wants that. But it's the sad fact is that a lot of San Bruno is nowhere close to public transit.
Yes, I
that's,
do agree.
You know, that's a topic for another day.
Yes, I do agree. So I'll continue with ADU. So there are more changes other than what I just have mentioned. ADU now has to be reviewed by an ministerial review process, meaning that there's no discretion that could be allowed. There's no appeal for ADUs, and also the state has restrict the amount of time that city can review an ADU application. From the time city staff receives an ADU application, city is obligated to act within 60 days. Within 60 days, we need to let the owner to know whether or not you are complete, we need additional information and whatnot. AB 13 also gives ADU a amnesty program. So if the owner has create an ADU without complying with a building permit or getting the proper authorization, the owner can request the city through an amnesty program to delay the legalization effort up to 5 years, as long as the chief building official deems the structure having no safety or life and safety concern. So that is a possibility the state also provided. For certain nonprofit affordable homeowners through AB 587, they may be eligible to purchase these ADUs. So that's also a possibility. AB 670 states that if any housing community that has a HOA or CCNR that limits the creation of ADU, the state law will prevail. Lastly, AB 671 gives state an authority and also gives the state the obligation to provide more grant funding and also more money opportunity for city to provide more incentive for the creation of ADUs. So ADUs is one of the big steps that state is taking to create the housing crisis at this point. All right. The next big topic, aside from ADU as part of the housing bill package, is what we call the SB 330. It's commonly known as the Housing Crisis Act. This introduced a new 2-step process that includes a preliminary application and processing time frame. So for instance, a developer can request the city to file for a preliminary application. They will have to download the checklist from the city website, and basically based on the checklist, they can give the city very preliminary assumption of what that development would entail. Based on the preliminary application, the city is obligated to give them everything the city will ever check, verify pertaining to the development. At the time the draft letter is provided to the developer, all of the regulations and the fees associated with that development will be quote unquote locked. So when the application comes back for the formal application, if for some reason the city has updated their ordinances that requires additional standards, or there will be additional impact fees imposed, the development will be exempt from that updated checklist, standard, or fees. This also modified the Permit Streamlining Act and Housing Accountability Act, the PSA and the HAA. So the PSA and HAA allow certain residential project to be approved within a certain amount of time. This shortens it. On top of that, SB 330 tells the city that you can only hold 5 meetings altogether from the time the application is deemed complete to the time that the application is approved. These 5 meetings, public meetings, can include community outreach meeting, city council study session, public planning commission meeting, architectural review meeting, TSPC meeting, any meeting that is a public meeting, and the number of the meetings that could be held is 5. However, this SB 330 does not provide an automatic exemption for CEQA. So they will still have to go through the regular environmental review to make sure either a mitigated negative declaration or exemption or EIR has to be prepared. I'll answer a question. I see Commissioner Hamilton quite perplexed.
Well, because I look at the number of commissions, boards, and committees that we have in San Bruno, and we'll have 5 meetings in 2 weeks.
So we will have to look into how public meeting is defined and whether or not we could meet the intent of SB 330 and still be able to process these projects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it helps anybody to rush through. I mean, I understand the spirit of it. It's that you know the cities can't delay. They're trying to get housing put in, and that makes complete sense.
Right.
But also to force it all to happen within a week or 2 weeks is
within
also
5
crazy
meetings.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So for as far as I know, that the city of San Bruno requires a community outreach meeting for a large project, and mostly a planning commission meeting, city council possibly.
So are these meetings about the project
Correct.
in general? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
I was
about the
thinking
project.
just of any kind.
No.
Because you were talking
So
SBC
number
and
of
other things.
meetings that the project has to go through before it gets approved.
Got it.
Yeah.
Through the chair. Were these just residential projects or this any project?
So this has to be at least 2/3 residential project,
Okay.
so mixed-use project.
Thank you.
So this is the other handout that's in your packet. This handout is prepared by 21 Elements, kind of gives you an idea of what SB 330 is all about. As I mentioned, application will be posted on our website. We're still working on it. And once the developer submits the preliminary application, they have 180 days before a draft letter that has to be prepared by city that outlines all of the concerns and also the fees. Then the applicant can come in and do the final application. If they are deemed complete, then they have 60 days for, letter determining consistency with objective standards. So then the city will determine whether or not you're moving on to the next public hearing. At the same time, we're reviewing CEQA. It's a very streamlined process for at least 2/3 residential projects. Aside from ADU and SB 330, there is still a slew of other housing laws. I'll start with AB 1485. As I mentioned earlier, most of you have heard of SB 35 that were introduced by the state many years ago. The intention was for SB 35 to go through the project entitlement process without any discretionary review, and this will apply to mostly low and very low income affordable housing. AB 1485 provides a middle income housing by allowing also moderate income housing as part of the SB 35 project. AB 1763 is what we call the density bonus provision. So the state now has enhanced the density bonus for any project that comes in with 100% affordable development. This would include providing up to 4 concessions or adding on to another possibly 3-story on top of these development standard. AB 1483 is what we call the Fee Transparency Act. So this allows, well, actually requires all jurisdiction to share fee standards, anything that pertain to a development proposal on their website as of January 1st, 2020. AB 1482, this is the one that I was mentioning earlier. It's the tenant protection. which limits the amount of rent increase that the landlord can impose on tenant in a year, and also to allow a just cause provision for the tenant. So the landlords cannot just free willy evict a tenant without a just cause. SB 6, AB 1255, and AB 1486 is what relates to the surplus land. So the three different bills relates to three different entities. The first one that requires all public agencies to have a list of surplus land made available on their website as of last December 31st, 2019. And also, it requires the state to have a list of all the state-owned surplus land publicly made available to any developers who are interested in affordable housing. And the third one allows, or actually requires, the city to have the surplus land that has been either transferred, leased, or sold reported on the annual progress report. As most of you probably will see, this department prepares the APR every year for the number of building permits or housing units that has been entitled or completed or getting a certificate compliance, a certificate occupancy within that year. So the annual report now also includes a section on surplus land. Lastly, it's the AB 101, is what's called the Homeless Navigation Center. So Homeless Navigation Center will have to be allowed by right in all mixed use and non-residential and multifamily zones.
Through the chair, can you go back to the previous just for a second? Do we, so what's on our list of surplus land in San Bruno? Do we have any?
We don't have any right now.
Okay, I
The
didn't think
city
so. I
doesn't
didn't think
have
so.
any. The school district does have a few school sites.
Well, one less.
One less, you're
They
absolutely
used
right.
to.
Yes.
And through the chair, just to be clear, though, so these by right, I mean, if it's by right, this would mean it would basically not come before us for a conditional use permit, is that correct?
That's correct.
So it would just go through the building department and the plan and for permitting with staff?
There could be possibly planning staff review, but there would not be any discretionary review involved.
Okay.
So the next steps. Currently, we are looking into what our city current ordinance in determining the next steps in an effort to complete the necessary update. The good news is that we have applied for the SB2 grant last year, which we have received $160,000 from the state to complete a lot of these housing law changes. We're in the midst of trying to figure out what our priority is and what is the next ordinance update after the parking is done. So we're also working on the development application and checklist pertaining to SB 330's change and also other ADU changes. The next available grant that the state has provided is called the LEAP. It's called the Local, let me see if I can find the acronym for it. Local Early Action Planning Grant. So we are looking into apply for that grant. If awarded, the city may receive up to another $150,000 from the state towards completing the housing law zoning update. As I mentioned, after that, we'll be working on an annual progress report that's aimed to go to council for approval at the end of March. After that, we'll be looking at our next housing element update, which is due December next year. There's a lot in our pipeline. That concludes my presentation, and I'm more than happy to answer any other questions that you may have. I understand this was a lot that being thrown at you last minute, too. Oh, in your packet, I don't remember. This is a technical assistance memo that's prepared by HCD pertaining to ADU. So any sort of questions and information that you're looking for also provides the 6 bills on its own. And this is an excerpt of the more detailed analysis of each Senate bills and Ministry Assembly bills that's prepared by the League of Cities. That's it.
So Pamela, I do have just a very quick question. As you were listing this, it was clear to me that this is going to make a lot of change for staff as it goes, as these things come into the pipeline. And am I right to understand that the grants that have been awarded and that are being applied to would help staff to either bring on more staff or give them the tools that they need to implement these things?
So the SB2 grant that we have been awarded is targeted to do zoning code update to comply with the state housing law, not necessarily bring additional staff. However, we have been applying some of them towards Kelly. If you remember, Kelly Beggs from Good City. So she is one of our consultants that's helping us to get the zoning code update.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes?
So these changes, looking at it from your staffing level, is this going to be more work? Because it seems like everything is just going to have to happen so much faster.
That's correct.
So is this a bigger burden on the staff?
So in terms of workload, it's twofold. So number one is we have to identify what we need to do. So that's workload number one. Once we have completed our zoning code update, the ADU process may be easier because there's not a whole lot that we can do. With SB 330 and other density bonus provision, there might be more because we will have to do our homework up front. So it really depends on how projects are coming in.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
You're
Really
welcome.
helpful.
Yes,
Yeah.
very helpful.
And I'll be emailing those presentations to
And
you separately.
That includes the memos will show up as a PDF
Yes.
for safekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Pamela, it looks like the last staff item is
Oh.
the selection of the March 12th Architectural Review Committee members.
Yes. So if I can have 3 volunteers for the March 12th Architectural Review Committee meeting.
I'm available.
I mean, I'm available.
Oh. I just need one more.
I'll be available.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And just to give you a heads up, so we will be bringing the RAC to Architectural and Review Committee, I want to say in April, and possibly the Stratford School to Architectural Review Committee in May. With that said, the RAC should be coming to Planning Commission in May and Stratford School to you for review in June. So there will be several big projects coming along the way.
Through the chair, is the Stratford School for the Crystal Springs or for the one up at Crestmore?
El Crestmore?
Or they have the one at the closed Crestmore down up on
So
the
this
Rolling
will
Wood.
be for the new one on the back of the rack. On
Okay.
Balboa.
Morel Crystal
For the,
Street.
okay,
Yeah.
the new one.
So we have some exciting project in the
Yeah.
pipeline for you.
And I think the next rec center meeting is being proposed for April 2nd, like the next subcommittee.
Yes. Okay. Well, in that case, if our staff section is complete, we will open up for a second public comment. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda, this is your time.
I was in here when I talked about the limits rents increases and influence on this cost.
If you'd like, you can come up to the podium and, or to the, what is this thing called? It's a podium.
Podium,
Come
yeah.
to the podium.
The microphone. State your name.
Yeah, and you can share your name and your question.
My name is Alessio Pavoni. I live at 315 Cortland Drive here in San Bruno. And I'm just wondering, what was, I was here in the beginning, what was it rent increase implements just cause? What was that about?
I can answer.
Pamela was giving us an overview of the changing to the state housing laws that are going to be affecting our city.
Yes.
So are you able to answer that?
I could briefly explain it. So this is a state housing law that changed, that has already become effective January 1st, this year. So basically, this AB 1482 puts a limit of the amount of rent the landlord can impose on the tenants, and also that if every time there's an eviction, there should be a just cause, meaning that there should be a reason for the eviction, and also there should be some relocation assistance. So it's a state law that has gone into effect.
Oh, yes, yeah, I know, but I know, okay, that agrees with the state law, right?
Correct, that is correct.
I heard about that one. Okay, was there anything said about the Crestmore development or anything like that? No, there was nothing about Crestmore?
The Crestmore High School, you mean?
For housing up at Crestmore? Trying to develop housing up there at Crestmore?
That's not on, no, it hasn't been on the agenda for
No,
tonight.
okay.
Yeah,
That was my concern.
okay. No, you
Okay.
haven't missed anything.
Okay,
Well,
thank you for, okay.
correct.
Sure.
This is our second open comment. If you have a comment you'd like to make about that topic, we're welcome to
Well-
receive that, though we may not have
Yeah,
an answer for you.
Corner Street is not a very big street. If you had more houses up there, I don't know if that street gonna be handling all that traffic. You know, it's a pretty small street, it's only, well, you know, one way each way, you know? So you can't make that road any wider than it is. So what alternatives would you have besides that? Go up the other way,
Which street?
Which street? I'm sorry.
Corner Drive, Corner Street Drive.
Oh, okay,
Leads up
okay.
to the back.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's only
yeah,
like
Yeah.
2 lanes, one way going up and down. If you have a lot more houses up there, it'd be a bit difficult for that road to handle all that traffic in the morning, especially in the morning.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions that what could be done about that?
Well, we'll take your comment as a comment, and then because this isn't something that's been brought before us, and there's not been a traffic study, which is typically done for developments, I don't know if we're able to,
I don't think that
To-
should be able to handle all that traffic. You've got quite a few houses up there,
yeah.
you know, it'd be pretty difficult. It'd be
Truly.
pretty difficult for the residents that live up there right now. You know, backing up from the driveway, I mean, they'd be just stuck,
Yeah.
practically.
Yes,
Through the chair.
Commissioner.
If it makes you feel any better, when the project comes before us, I'll remember that you made the effort to come down and talk to us, and I'll make sure that we talk about that.
Okay, sounds good.
You're very welcome.
Okay, thank you for letting me come up here.
Of course.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to share? Okay. So we'll go ahead and close public comment, and we'll bring it back to the commission for any items from members and from subcommittees. And I do believe that we have Commissioner Harmon who'd like to share an update on his training that he went to recently.
Yeah, I mean, I have all of the documents from it. It was, I would say most of it was more of academic interest than directly applicable. There were, I thought, a couple of items of interest. One was there was a review of the housing law updates, much of the same content we've just been discussing. One of the items that came up there was there have been the ongoing efforts. At the time, I'm trying to remember, I believe it was before SB 50 had failed to pass, and so it was still a live issue. But there is an expectation that something like it is going to get debated again in the Senate in this coming year, and if it is passed in the fall, it would go into effect January 1st of next year. One of the provisions that has been put into that law and that will almost certainly be retained in further debate is something that was negotiated by the California League of Cities in the last 6 months, was that if your city can present that its planning process has already put in place zoning to add the requisite number of housing units at the various affordability levels, extremely low, low, moderate, above moderate, and you can demonstrate progress on meeting that housing production, you're just completely exempt from SB 50. And so I think it will be a matter of interest to figure out whether the transit corridor plan actually already zones us for the housing production we need, because in that case it's just going to be irrelevant to us, which would be nice, because really the ideal, I think, for all of us is that we produce adequate housing on our own terms, in the terms that the voters of our town voted for. The other item that I thought was somewhat of interest as we begin to plan the development of the Engvall site that we assume is going to happen, so that's going to be transferred. It will be coming out of the school system's portfolio, the school district's portfolio, and becoming relevant to San Bruno City planning. There was a discussion of zoning and building codes dealing with fires and talking about Paradise. And one of the, I know I wrote some notes on this. I can find. Here it is. Basically, that the sort of classic suburban subdivision design of widely spaced houses is much less defensible, and that, you know, while people can be encouraged to maintain defensible space, it's been the experience was that the buildings that were like that were sort of, you know, people just aren't. People put wood piles against the side of their house. They build a deck that is actually flammable. They do, or they, you know, put wood piles under the deck. Various other, you know, bushes that dry out, and that a built environment that has a cluster of buildings surrounded by a larger amount of open space, the places where that existed in the areas where, you know, the Paradise Fire and so on, that those buildings survived because you brought one truck and you have it in one location and you soak down all the roofs from one spot, and your resources are not spread as thin. And I think fire is less of a risk in our town compared to some of these other communities just because of our microclimate. You know, we have a lot more moisture, but with weather becoming, you know, swinging to extremes, you know, I mean, we could conceivably have, you know, 2-3 years of drought running, and especially with the eucalyptuses up in Crestmore Canyon, which are just terrible for fire. They're very oily. If they dry out, they become super, super flammable. I think somewhat famously about 20 to 30 years ago, I forget when, but there was the Oakland Hills fire where you had streets that were lined with eucalyptuses and the fire would just boom, boom, boom down the trees. And so, I mean, I think it is a thing that is going to be worth considering as we look at plans for that subdivision of what can be done, you know, planned in advance to make the space more defensible against a fire coming from the ridge line or from Crestmore Canyon.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a very helpful and relevant report. Thank you for attending and for sharing your knowledge. Anybody else with a report?
Just a comment on that through the chair. I agree that the eucalyptus are very low fire resistance. They actually explode in a fire and shower the debris, the flaming debris, over other trees. And you know, most of the fires in Australia, the recent fires there, nearly all the trees in Australia are eucalyptus.
Yeah.
So
I would say I do have, if anyone's interested, I have the my full note file from that. I think I can't actually remember whether I have all the slides. I know I'd asked the people running it for those. I can follow up with them again.
That would be great. Thank you.
I have a comment. So these are comments that are relevant to the Planning Commission that I was planning on sending to City Council, but I wanted to share them here first since it's relevant to this committee. On January 27th, the Burlingame Planning Commission approved a 9-unit project along El Camino. And in reading about it, I was struck by the fact that that project went before the full Planning Commission a total of 3 times in the year leading up to the final vote for approval. And then, of course, I'm comparing that to Mills Park, which was a huge and potentially city-changing project that came before this full committee once at the end, and the only options that were given to us were approve it as is and send it to the council, or deny the project completely and permanently. So what struck me is that somewhere along the way, this commission, at least for the large projects, stopped being an advisory body and instead become a simple checkpoint to ensure that large projects meet the law. And so I'm not, make no mistake, I still believe this commission is doing necessary and productive work for the residential projects and the small business projects that we see here each month. But I also believe that this body should have at least the same power to advise and shape on large projects that we do for small ones. This part's interesting because we just learned about this new law for five meeting limit on projects. But I don't believe in complaining about stuff without offering potential solutions. So the proposal is that the city adopt a process mandating that for projects of 10 units or more, there should be a minimum of 2 study sessions held jointly by the City Council and this full Planning Commission, one held early on during the design process and another later on when the project is being finalized prior to going to the ARC. The format can be similar to the town halls that developers are already holding, but they would be city-run meetings where council members and planning commissioners can ask questions and help direct the process before the design phase is complete instead of after. If this process had been in place for Mills Park, I did the count and that we would have been at exactly 5 when it got to the city council. So anyway, this is something I'm going to share with city council, but I felt it was appropriate that I share it here first since it involves our commission. So that's it.
Through the chair,
Yes.
were there community meetings for the Mills Park?
Yes,
There were community meetings.
they were run
yes.
by the developer.
Right. Yeah, I just couldn't, because I also served on the Park and Rec, then muddling some of those meetings together. And so I was trying to remember I remember the process, but I don't remember the amount of meetings. So it wasn't like
There was one early on a few years ago when it was first proposed, and that was the first version of Mills Park that was a box. And then there were 2 more later on when it was mostly finalized. I did go to both of those because I had not been sworn in yet. One before I was appointed and when I had put in my application, and one after I was appointed, but before I was sworn in. And when I showed up, I was looked at like, oh my God, you could ask questions like you're not supposed to be here, which was odd. And I didn't. I just said, I just want to learn. And I sat in the back. I didn't ask any questions. I just took notes. But it was like an only opportunity before it came to the ARC, which actually I wasn't. I still hadn't been sworn in by the ARC to learn about the project. That was the only way I had any notes prior to getting that huge packet that we got the Friday before it came here, to be able to understand and have questions. That's why I had so many questions ready. So
we also had various architectural review. I tried to attend most of those because once you attend one, you're part of the bigger picture. And so there were various opportunities to have ARC reviews and having the public also at those meetings. So
there was more than, it came before the ARC more than once?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know how many, but I know that you were at least at 2 of them.
Well, that's good to know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Any other reports or comments from commissioners? No?
Just one, if I may.
Yes?
For the gentleman recording the meeting's available on YouTube? The city posts it? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Miriam does a really good job. Of course. Well, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that the whole meeting was available to you. You're welcome. Sure thing.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else, we're going to move into adjournment. The next regular Planning Commission meeting will be held on March 17th at 7 p.m. here at the Senior Center. The time is 8:04, and we are now adjourned. Good night.